As we prepare for Shavuot, as we continue through Sfirat HaOmer, we're reminded again in this week's Parsha of Har Sinai. By Dvar Adonai al Moshe, Har Sinai Lemor, and then the Torah goes and it continues to teach us the laws of Shemitah. Famously, Rashi asks, Ma inyan Shemitah etzel Har Sinai? What's the connection between Shemitah and Har Sinai? Why are they juxtaposed? The mentioning of them or even more so, why does the Torah explicitly tell us that we're in Har Sinai? It's not something just in this week's Parsha, that question. It's something that appears in Pirkei Avot as well. For those of us who are studying Pirkei Avot between the period of Pesach and Shavuot, we know that Pirkei Avot starts with Moshe Kibel Torah Misinai, right? Pirkei Avot, which is where we learn of the teachings of the rabbis of how to live life with grace and dignity and respect for one another, actually appears in the Mishnah, in Seder Nazikin, which talks about the laws of judges and courts and stealing and dinei mamonos, financial issues. And that Masechet Avot, or Pirkei Avot, as we refer to it, starts off Moshe Kibel Torah Sinai, that Moshe got the Torah from Sinai. And it's weird, this mentioning of Har Sinai. Why do we need to know that we got the Torah from Har Sinai? We know that. Rashi explains in this week's Parsha, just like we got Shemitah and the laws of Shemitah, and it's all enumerated and elaborated, we know that's from Har Sinai, so too everything else is from Har Sinai. And the same is true with Masechet Avot, with Pirkei Avot. You shouldn't think that just the laws of dinei mamonos, just the financial laws, and just the halachos of stealing and killing and courts, only that we got from the Torah. But you should know that also the midos, as the Bartanura mentions, Shelubadu Chachamim. You shouldn't think that Chachamim fabricated this or made it up, or it's their own Torah. We got that also at Har Sinai. This concept, Har Sinai, is not just a place; it's clearly a concept. It's something greater than just a place and just a location. Obviously, one thing we could learn is that we don't know which mitzvos are more important. We don't know which ones we shouldn't belittle any of the mitzvos, because they're all important, rather, as we learn in Pirkei Avot. But another lesson I think perhaps we could learn from Har Sinai that we're going to read about on Shavuos, from the Har Sinai, from when we get the Torah. The Torah famously, again, Vayichan Sham Yisrael Neged Ahar, the Torah mentions Har Sinai in singular, and I think many of us have heard this idea before, but it's one that can be repeated really every day, that the Jewish people were united. Vayichan Sham Yisrael, Rashi says, Ish Echad Belev Echad, as one people, as one heart. And as we approach now getting the Torah again, receiving the Torah on this Shavuot, so it's something to think about, and it's something to remember. If you watch what's going on in Israel right now, not with politics, not on the news, but what's really going on in Israel right now on the ground, after a week of tragedy, 45 families who are sitting Shiva, 46 actually, after this week's events, and you see thousands and thousands of people going to each family. You see the UJA of Toronto, which sent money to each family to help cover some of their expenses. You see people setting up shops on the streets and giving away free food Erev Shabbos for the families that need. You see a country coming together in unity. As Danny Morris was one of the people who was who we lost in the tragedy in Meron from Teaneck. He was learning in Yeshivat Shalavim. His Rebbe of Königsberg mentioned at the Levaya that at the first week of Yeshiva this year, so they asked the guys, what do you want to focus on this year? And people said all different ideas about Limud Torah and learning and growing. And Danny Morris raised his hand at the end and he said, I want to grow in my midos, I want to grow in my derech eretz. And he said, when I go back to Teaneck, even though his father said at the Levaya, he said he was sure that his son was going to stay in Shalavim forever. But he said, when I go back to Teaneck and I see my parents, they're not going to be able to see the sugyas that I learned in my head. They're not going to be able to see the Shaki Vataria. They're not going to be able to see the Pilpulim that I learned. What they will be able to see is my midos. If I was successful in my Limud Torah, you'll be able to see that in how I interact with others. And that's, I think, a lesson we could take with us from this week, from Har Sinai, that first of all, if we're learning Torah properly, the derachim of the Torah are noam, they're pleasant, every single path of Torah is shalom. Every single one, not some of them. Every single path is darchei shalom. And I think we need to learn that also for receiving the Torah, and also as an indicator if we've been successful in learning Torah. And I think that's something we could learn again from the introduction from Pirkei Avos, from the introduction to this week's parsha, and from the growing and the momentum up to Shavuot itself, as we accept the Torah together, Bezrat Hashem Besimcha, and we should celebrate just like we have come together in a time of tragedy and a difficult time in Canada and all around the world. We should learn to celebrate together as well. Everybody should have a Shabbat Shalom.